I was born into money, but I never felt rich. My earliest memories weren't of toys or vacations like other kids bragged about in school. No, mine were of mahogany conference tables, endless phone calls about shares, investments, and clients. My father, Charles Bennett, the legendary banker, ran our family like he ran his empire, with precision, discipline, and zero tolerance for weakness. My mother, elegant and sharp as a diamond, was no different. Then there were my two older brothers, Richard and Edward. Perfect suits, perfect smiles, perfect futures laid out in front of them like red carpets. Even my younger sister, Claire, had a knack for numbers that made my parents beam with pride. And then, there was me. While my family dined on fine china and discussed quarterly profits, I was in my room taking apart an old laptop I'd rescued from the trash, trying to understand how it worked. I loved it, the hum of the machine, the logic of the code, the feeling of solving problems that had nothing to do with money or status. But in the Bennett family, passion meant nothing if it didn't have a financial return. "You'll grow out of it," my father said one evening when I told him I wanted to study computer science instead of finance. He didn't even look up from his newspaper. "It's not a phase," I muttered. He lowered the paper and stared at me like I just confessed to robbing a bank. "Programming is for hobbyists and underachievers. You are a Bennett. We don't build things. We buy them." That was the first time I realized, to my father, I wasn't a son. I was an investment that was failing to perform. By the time I turned 18, the pressure was unbearable. Richard and Edward had already started their internships at the bank, and my parents couldn't wait for me to follow. Every family dinner felt like an interrogation. "Have you reconsidered your future? You're wasting your potential. Do you want to embarrass us?" I stopped answering. I stopped talking at all. But I never stopped coding. At night, when the house was quiet, I would sneak out of bed, open my laptop, and lose myself in my own world. It was the only time I felt alive, when I wasn't Charles Bennett's son, or Richard and Edward's embarrassing brother. I was just me. Claire was the only one who didn't treat me like a stranger. She'd sometimes sneak into my room and sit beside me while I worked. "You know," she whispered one night, "they're wrong about you." I smiled. "Yeah? Then why does it feel like I'm the only mistake in this family?" "Because you're different," she said. "And that scares them." I didn't know it then, but her words would be the last comfort I'd get from anyone in my family for a very long time. It all came crashing down the summer after I graduated high school. I'd been accepted into a small but reputable tech program at a local university. I was ecstatic. I printed out the acceptance letter and brought it to dinner like a trophy. When I handed it to my father, he didn't even read past the first line. "This is a joke," he said, tossing the letter onto the table. "It's not a joke," I replied, my voice shaking. "This is what I want, Dad." "What you want," he said slowly, as though testing the words, "has never mattered less to me than it does right now." Richard smirked. Edward laughed. My mother just sighed and poured herself another glass of wine. And then my father delivered the final blow. "If you walk out that door and chase this fantasy, don't bother coming back. You'll get no money, no support. You'll be on your own." I looked at Claire, hoping for some kind of silent plea, but even she couldn't meet my eyes. So I left. I'll never forget the sound of that front door closing behind me. It was the sound of my old life ending. I didn't have much. Just my laptop, a backpack full of clothes, and $300 in savings. I slept on my friend Jake's couch for the first few weeks. He was a bartender with a bad sense of humor and an even worse apartment, but he never once asked me why I was there. He just tossed me a pillow and said, "You better not snore." I worked odd jobs to keep myself afloat, delivering food, cleaning offices at night, and taking freelance coding gigs that paid next to nothing. During the day, I went to classes, then stayed up until dawn teaching myself every programming language I could find tutorials for. And slowly I got better. I built my first real app in my second year of university. It was terrible, buggy, ugly, and completely useless, but it was mine. And when I showed it to Jake, he grinned like I just handed him gold. "Dude," he said, "this is the start. I can feel it." For the first time in my life, someone actually believed in me. But my family didn't. I still called sometimes, mostly out of habit. My mother never answered. Richard told me I was embarrassing the family. Edward said I'd come crawling back when I was broke. And my father? He didn't speak to me at all. By the time I turned 22, I stopped calling. That's when everything changed. I was sitting in my tiny apartment, surrounded by empty coffee cups and fast food wrappers, staring at my laptop screen. I'd been working on a new app, a simple productivity tool that I thought could actually make life easier for people. I'd been at it for 6 months, pouring every spare second into perfecting it. The night I launched it, I didn't expect anything. Maybe a few downloads from random users. Maybe nothing at all. Instead, I woke up the next morning to find it had gone viral. 10,000 downloads, then 50,000, then 100,000. Emails started flooding in. Investors wanted to talk. Reviewers were calling it brilliant. And for the first time in my life, I realized I was right. I didn't need the family bank. I didn't need their approval. I was going to make it on my own. Success didn't come quietly. Within months, my app was featured on tech blogs, and venture capitalists were emailing me offers I couldn't believe were real. I hired a small team, just 3 people, all of us crammed into a tiny rented office with peeling paint and buzzing fluorescent lights. But we didn't care. We were building something that mattered, and I was finally happy. But happiness didn't erase the past. One evening, while checking my overflowing inbox, I noticed a name I hadn't seen in years. Claire. My heart skipped. For a second, I almost didn't open it. But curiosity won. Ethan, I saw the news about your app. I'm proud of you. Call me? Just reading her words felt like stepping into another lifetime. I stared at the email for a long time before finally replying. Thanks, Claire. I miss you. She called me that night. Her voice hadn't changed. It was still soft, still kind. I knew you'd do it, she said. I told them you would. I laughed bitterly. Yeah, well, I'm sure Dad's thrilled. Pause. He doesn't talk about you. None of them do. But I think they watch. I know Richard mentioned your company once. Richard, the brother who used to mock me for wasting my life. I almost didn't believe it. Claire hesitated. You should come home. Just once. It's different now. Different, I repeated. Last time I checked, they kicked me out. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but maybe it's time. I didn't answer. How could I? For years, I dreamed of hearing those words, of having a way back. And yet, now that it was in front of me, all I felt was anger. Weeks passed. My company grew. Investors poured in. We moved into a bigger office, and for the first time in my life, I had employees who looked to me for guidance. But every night, after the workday ended and the office lights went dark, I thought about Claire's words. Maybe it was time. So one weekend, I drove back. The Bennett estate hadn't changed. Tall iron gates, perfectly trimmed hedges, a mansion that looked more like a fortress than a home. As I stood there, keys in my pocket, I felt like a kid again. Small, unwanted, out of place. The door opened before I even knocked. Claire stood there, smiling nervously. You came, she said. Yeah, I breathed. She hugged me, and for a moment, the years melted away. Then I saw them. My father, standing in the hallway, arms crossed. My mother, perfectly composed as always. Richard and Edward, looking at me like I was a stranger who didn't belong in their house. Ethan, my father said flatly. Dad. He studied me for a moment, then gestured toward the dining room. We're eating. Join us. No apology. No welcome. Just a command. But I followed anyway. Dinner was strange. Nobody talked about the years I'd been gone. Nobody mentioned the night they'd told me to leave. Instead, they asked about my company like it was some interesting stock they were considering investing in. So, Richard said, smirking, the little coding hobby actually paid off. I forced a smile. Yeah, guess I was just wasting my time. Huh, my father cleared his throat. You've built something impressive. I'll admit, I didn't expect that. It was the closest thing to a compliment I'd ever get from him. My mother, ever the diplomat, sipped her wine and said, You should come by more often. Family is family, after all. Family. The word tasted bitter. I nodded politely, but inside, I was screaming. Did they really think we could just pretend none of it happened? When dinner ended, Claire walked me to the door. They're proud of you, she whispered. Are they? I asked. She gave me a sad smile. In their own way. Driving home that night, I realized something. I didn't need their pride. I didn't need their approval. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the boy who begged for their acceptance. I was the man who didn't need it. But deep down, I also knew this wasn't the end. Because sooner or later, my family would find a way to test me again. And next time, I wouldn't be so forgiving. I didn't have to wait long for the next test. came 2 weeks later in the form of an unexpected phone call. "Ethan," Claire's voice said on the other end, "Dad wants to see you. Privately." I froze. My father had never called me himself. The idea that he actually wanted to meet me, just the two of us, felt almost absurd. "When?" I asked. "Tonight. At the office." His office. Not home. Not neutral ground. His domain. I almost said no, but something inside me, some mix of curiosity and stubbornness, made me agree. The Bennett Financial Headquarters was exactly as I remembered it. Polished marble floors, gold-lettered signage, and an air of quiet arrogance. I walked past the same receptionist who used to shoo me out when I was a kid. This time, she smiled nervously and said, "Mr. Bennett is expecting you." When I entered his office, my father was standing by the window, staring out at the city skyline like a king surveying his kingdom. "Ethan," he said, turning to face me. His tone was calm, almost measured. "Dad." He gestured to a chair. "Sit." I didn't. "Why am I here?" He smirked slightly, straight to the point. "I suppose that's what makes you different." Different is one word for it. He didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he walked around his desk and sat down, folding his hands like a man preparing for a negotiation. "I've been watching you," he said. "Your company. Your success." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what this is? Congratulations?" He leaned back, unbothered by my sarcasm. "I'm not a man who wastes words. You've done well, better than I expected. But you could do more. With the right backing. With family." I laughed. Couldn't help it. "Family? You mean the same family that told me to leave and never come back?" His expression didn't change. "We were protecting you from yourself. But clearly you didn't need our protection. Which is why I'm offering you something now. Come work with us, Ethan. Join Bennett Financial. We could merge your company into the family business. Make it bigger than anything you could do alone." I stared at him, stunned. "You want me to give up everything I built, just so I can finally be the son you wanted?" He didn't even blink. "I want you to be smart." For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the man who had once kicked me out like I was nothing. Now he needed me, and God, it felt good. But I wasn't that kid anymore. "Thanks for the offer," I said finally. "But no, I didn't build this company so you could slap the Bennett name on it and pretend you made me who I am. I'm not your project. Not anymore." His jaw tightened. It was the first crack in his perfect composure. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Maybe," I replied, heading for the door. "But it's mine to make." Before I left, I glanced back at him one last time. For just a second, I thought I saw something in his eyes. Something that almost looked like respect. Almost. When I got back to my office that night, Jake was waiting for me. He'd been with me from the start, and he didn't need an explanation to know where I'd been. "So," he asked, leaning against my desk, "you tell him to shove it?" I smirked. "Pretty much." He grinned. "Good. Now let's get back to work. We've got an update to push." And that was it. No drama, no second thoughts. I'd made my choice, and for the first time I felt completely free of him. Or at least I thought I was. Because a month later, my father showed up at my office. He didn't call first. He didn't ask permission. He just walked in like he owned the place, the security and all. "Ethan," he said, his voice low but steady, "we need to talk." I crossed my arms. "If this is another sales pitch, you can save it." He shook his head. "It's not. This is about family." I didn't trust him, but the look in his eyes was different this time. For the first time in my life, my father didn't look untouchable. He looked human, and what he said next proved it. "It's your mother," he said. "She's sick." I don't know what I expected him to say, but it wasn't that. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at him. My father, always so composed, so unshakable, actually looked smaller. "What do you mean sick?" I asked. My voice cracked without my permission. "She was diagnosed last week," he said, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Pancreatic cancer. It's aggressive." I felt like the room tilted. All my anger, all my carefully built walls, they didn't matter in that moment. She was my mother, the woman who used to sneak me cookies behind Dad's back when I was a kid. The only one who, in her quiet way, tried to soften the sharp edges of this family. "Why didn't anyone tell me sooner?" He looked at me, his face unreadable. "Because I didn't think you'd care." I almost shouted at him, but the words never came. I just stood there, hands clenched into fists, trying to keep from shaking. "Where is she?" I asked finally. "At home," he said. "She's been asking about you." That broke me. I grabbed my jacket and didn't even say goodbye. When I walked into the Bennett estate that night, the air felt different. The house was quieter, dimmer. Claire met me at the door, her eyes red. "She's upstairs," she whispered. I climbed the staircase 2 steps at a time, my heart pounding. When I pushed open her bedroom door, I saw her. Lying there, frail but smiling when she saw me. "Ethan," she whispered. I sat beside her and took her hand. Felt so small in mine. "I'm here, Mom," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. She looked at me for a long time, her eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in years. Peace. "I knew you'd come." I wanted to tell her everything. About my company, about how I'd finally made it, about how much I missed her. But all I could manage was, "I'm sorry I stayed away." She squeezed my hand weakly. "You were always braver than the rest of us. You followed your heart." I swallowed hard. "I just wanted you to be proud." She smiled. "I always was." I stayed there for hours, talking to her about everything and nothing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the outcast. I just felt like her son. When I left her room, my father was waiting in the hallway. "She's strong," he said. "Yeah," I replied. We stood there in silence, 2 men who'd spent their lives at war with each other, and for the first time, it didn't feel like war. "Ethan," he said quietly, "whatever happens, she needs us, all of us. No more fighting." I didn't know if I believed him, but for her sake, I nodded. Okay. The next few weeks were a blur. I split my time between my company and my mother's bedside. Claire and I grew close again. Even Richard and Edward, though still distant, treated me like I was part of the family again, if only because Mom demanded it. But one night, as I was leaving the estate, my father stopped me. "You've built something incredible," he said. His voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "And I might have been wrong about you." I stared at him. "That's the closest thing to an apology I'll ever get, isn't it?" He smirked. "Don't push your luck." And for the first time in my life, I laughed with him. But deep down, I knew the peace couldn't last forever. Mom was fading. No matter how much we wanted to pretend otherwise, every day she looked a little weaker. And every time I left her room, I wondered if it would be the last time I'd hear her voice. One night, as I sat by her bed, she looked at me and whispered, "Promise me something, Ethan." "Anything, Mom. Don't let anger eat you alive. Family is worth forgiving." I didn't want to hear it, but I nodded anyway. "I promise." 2 weeks later, she was gone. The house was silent the night of the funeral. My brothers stood stiffly by the bar, my father surrounded by old business partners offering empty condolences. Claire clung to me like I was the only thing keeping her standing. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the outcast. I was just home. The day after the funeral, the house was heavy with silence. No one spoke much. Even the usual hum of staff footsteps felt muted, like the walls themselves were mourning her. That's when my father gathered us in his study. Claire, Richard, Edward, and I sat in a row, while our father stood near the window, arms crossed. A man in a dark suit, the family lawyer, sat at his desk, a stack of documents in front of him. "This is your mother's will," the lawyer said. "As per her request, I will read it aloud." I didn't expect anything. Honestly, I didn't want anything. All I wanted was for her to still be here. But as soon as the lawyer began, I realized no one else in the room felt the same way. Richard leaned forward, his jaw tight. Edward kept glancing at me like I was an intruder. Claire stared at her hands, nervous. And my father, he was a statue. "I, Margaret Bennett," the lawyer read, "being of sound mind, leave the following." He started with small things. Jewelry for Claire, a collection of rare watches for Richard, a vintage car for Edward. And then he paused. "To my son, Ethan." The room shifted. I could feel their eyes on me, sharp enough to cut glass. "I leave controlling interest in my personal trust, as well as my private property holdings in Boston and New York." I blinked. "What?" Richard shot up from his chair. "This is a joke." Edward slammed his hand against the table. "He hasn't been part of this family for years." "Enough," my father barked, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Bennett also left a personal letter to accompany this decision." He handed me a sealed envelope. My hands shook as I opened it. Her handwriting was neat, steady, like she'd written it on a day she felt strong. Ethan, you were always the one who followed your own path. I know this will anger your brothers, but I trust you. I want you to have this because I believe you'll use it to build something good. Don't let them turn this into a war. Please, forgive them even if they don't deserve it yet. Love, Mom. I had to swallow hard just to keep from breaking down in front of them. This is insane, Richard snapped. Dad, say something. My father looked at me for a long, unreadable moment. Then he turned to Richard and Edward. Your mother's word is final, he said. Richard gaped at him. You can't be serious. I am, my father interrupted. And if either of you think I'll let you dishonor her wishes, you'll find out very quickly how wrong you are. The room went dead quiet. For once, no one argued with him. After the lawyer left, my brothers stormed out, slamming the door behind them. Claire stayed behind, tears in her eyes. I'm happy for you, she said softly, hugging me. She believed in you, Ethan. She always did. I hugged her back, but I couldn't shake the knot in my chest. I'd won. But it didn't feel like winning. My father lingered near the desk. She made her choice, he said quietly, almost to himself. Then, for the first time in my life, he looked at me not as a disappointment, but as an equal. Don't waste it, he said and walked out. Later that night, I found Richard outside by the garden. He didn't look angry anymore, just tired. She always loved you more, he muttered. I shook my head. No, she loved us differently. And if you think this was about money, you didn't know her at all. He didn't respond, but he didn't walk away either. For the first time, I saw a crack in his armor. Maybe Mom had been right. Maybe forgiveness wasn't just possible. Maybe it was the only thing that could keep this family from tearing itself apart. And for her, I was willing to try. A week after the reading of the will, the tension in the house was still thick enough to cut with a knife. Richard and Edward barely spoke to me. Claire tried to play peacemaker, but even she couldn't bridge the silence. Mom's letter never left my pocket. Every time I felt the anger rising, I'd take it out and read her words again. Don't let them turn this into a war. Forgive them. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to try. One evening, I called Claire and asked her to bring everyone to the dining room. My father came too, though he didn't say a word, just sat at the head of the table watching. Richard and Edward walked in late, both wearing the same skeptical expression. What is this? Richard asked. Another victory lap for the new family favorite? I ignored the jab and stood. No, this isn't about me. It's about Mom. That got their attention. I placed her letter on the table. She wanted us to stop fighting. I don't care what the will says or what anyone thinks of me. I'm not taking anything away from this family. I want us to do something with it. Together. Edward frowned. Together? After everything? Yes, I said, because we're still her kids. Whether you like it or not, we're all she's got left. Richard scoffed. And why would we trust you? I looked him straight in the eye. Because I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to trust her. This is what she wanted. The room was quiet. Even my father didn't interrupt. Finally, Claire broke the silence. She'd want us to at least try, she said softly. Edward rubbed his face and muttered, God, I hate when she's right. Richard sighed, shaking his head, but I saw it. The anger was fading. Slowly. The next day, I invited them all to my office. I showed them what I'd built. My company wasn't just software, it was a platform for small businesses. A chance for people who didn't come from families like ours to succeed. I want to use Mom's trust to expand this, I said. Not for me, for everyone who needs it. And I want all of you to be part of it. For the first time in years, Richard didn't look like he wanted to strangle me. Edward didn't roll his eyes. Claire smiled like she'd been holding her breath forever and could finally exhale. Even my father gave me the smallest, proudest nod. Weeks passed. We argued, we stumbled, but we worked. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the walls between us began to crack. Richard and I shared late-night strategy calls. Edward actually laughed at one of my jokes and didn't immediately regret it. Claire became the glue holding us all together. And my father, one night, he came into my office, placed his hand on my shoulder, and simply said, Your mother would have been proud. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Months later, as we stood together in front of our first new office building, all of us, side by side, I realized something. I hadn't just forgiven them. I'd gotten my family back. And for the first time since I was a kid, I didn't feel like the black sheep. I just felt like a Bennett. If you've ever been through something like this, or if you know stories of families torn apart and brought back together, share them in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories that prove no matter how broken things seem, there's always a chance to heal.